So Proverbs 12 today, we're going to handle Proverbs 12 the same way we've done Proverbs 10 and 11. You may remember that Proverbs 1 through 9 go in these nice, long, smooth sections. And then beginning in Proverbs 10, we get into these 375 parables of Solomon's collection that are very much one to the next. And so there's a little bit of abruptness to them. And sometimes they're kind of clustered together, but there's not a whole lot of intentional structure. And so we need to kind of get a feel for that and how we read it. So there are 28 verses in Proverbs 12. I will read the first one, and then I will hand it off to Art, and then it'll go to Steve, and then Sherry, and then we'll go up to Todd, and then for that point we'll go to Norm, and then Nancy, and over to Sheila, and then we'll go Bob, and then Liz, and then Heather. And then over here we'll start in the back with Tasha, and we'll make Daytona and Dixie read too. I mean, they'll get to read, it'll be good. And then we'll come on over, and we'll go Charlotte and Karen and back to Jeff, and then come back up and John, who's in a class by himself, at least a row by himself. And then we'll do Deborah, Bill, and Hosea, and then Steve. And if we get back to me, I'll just read another one, and we'll just keep going around. If there's an awkward silence, it's probably your turn to read. So Proverbs 12. I will also give you a heads up. You've got to pay attention because there are a few of these where the wording is a little bit uncertain, and so the translation could go here, there, everywhere. So just confidently jump in when you think it's your turn. And if you're wrong, the worst thing that happens is we'll laugh at you. So Proverbs 12, and we'll read one at a time, and I'm going to begin in verse 1. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but he who hates correction is stupid.
Awkward silence. A good man obtaineth favor of the Lord, but a man of wicked devices will he contemn.
Wickedness never brings stability, but the godly have deep roots.
An excellent wife is the crown of her husband, but she who shames him is like rottenness in his bones.
The thoughts of the righteous are just, the advice of the wicked is treacherous.
The words of the wicked lie in wait for blood, but the speech of the upright rescues them.
The wicked are overthrown, and they are no more, but the house of the righteous stands firm.
A person is praised according to their prudence, and one with a warped mind is despised.
Better to be lowly and have a servant than to play the great man and lack bread.
The godly care for their animals, but the wicked are always cruel.
He who works his land will have abundant food, but he who chases fantasies lacks judgment.
The wicked desire the stronghold of evildoers, but the root of righteous endures.
Evildoers are trapped by their simple talk and innocency. From the fruit of the rich people are filled with good things, and the work of their hands bring them reward.
Fools think their own way is right, but the wise listen to others.
Fools show their annoyance at once, but the prudent overlook an insult.
He that speaketh truth showeth forth righteousness, but a false witness deceit.
Reckless words pierce like a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing.
Truthful lips endure forever, but a lying tongue lasts only a moment.
There is deceit in the hearts of those who plot evil, but joy for those who promote peace.
No harm befalls the righteous, but the wicked have their fill of trouble.
The Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in men who are truthful. 23. 12. Awkward silence.
It's okay.
Keep their knowledge to themselves, but a fool's heart blurts out folly.
Diligent hands will rule, but laziness ends in slave labor.
Heaviness in the heart of man maketh it stoop, but a good word maketh it glad.
The godly give good advice to their friends, the wicked lead them away.
A lazy man does not roast his prey, but the precious possession of a man is diligence.
In the path of righteousness there is life, and walking its path there is no death.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. So that was Proverbs chapter 12. You'll notice again that most of these are, all of them are two-liners, and most of them are two layers of contrast. This kind of person will get this kind of result, but this other kind of person gets this other kind of result. But then there's theme and variation on these, and there's a lot of these that are not quite exact. And that's one of the beauties of these little two-liners. By contrasting words that we wouldn't normally consider to be straight opposites, straight antonyms, they say more than what one verse can say. So verse 5, for example, verse 5, the plans of the righteous are just, but the advice of the wicked is deceitful. We don't think as deceitful as the opposite of justice. We think of injustice, the opposite of justice, and truth as the opposite of deceit. And so by mentioning just one of those in the pairing, you get the whole picture that justice and truthfulness go together, and that deception and injustice go together. So they're not always exact. There are a few other ones that are a little bit more inexact, not necessarily for the terms, but for the ways that they speak. Consider verse 10, for example. A righteous man cares for the needs of his animal, but the kindest acts of the wicked are cruel. That's not a straight opposite, but you get the idea that the righteous man is concerned about the well-being of his animals, his llamas or whatever else he may happen to have, and not in the ancient Near East, no llamas in the ancient Near East. But the kindest acts of the wicked are cruel, meaning that they're not kind, they're just cruel. But the two contrasts are not exact there, but they kind of give you a fuller picture of the difference there. We could go more of those. I'm interested, first of all, in the themes that stand out to you, or the proverbs that catch your attention, or anything particularly that the wording was weird and grabbed your eye. Yes, Sandy?
The one you just read about the righteous care for the needs of their animals, the kindest acts of the wicked are cruel.
Yes.
There's oftentimes that you see somebody who pretends to be being kind, but actually
Yes.
it has a double meaning or a double layer of making fun or, taunting.
Right, right.
Like they're gonna
Right.
hurt you, but they pull it back.
Right, I'm thinking about a description of Marie Barone. She has this way of appearing to give you a compliment when actually she's insulting you, right? But Sandy is saying it. I'm sorry, I can't help it. But Sandy is saying that they're when they're I do. And what's funny? Oh, anyway, yeah, it's just you just kind of have it in there. So, but Sandy is saying sometimes with the wicked here, they're doing something that appears kind, but there's an angle. There's something duplicitous. So there's yes. So there's. Right. There's an insincerity here. I was, Tiffany and I watched Rick Steves' Europe, and there was some travel tips on there, and how many of the beggars in Europe are actually thieves in disguise, and that's how they get your wallet. They bring you in that way. And so there's a duplicity in the wickedness. Like it seems like one thing, but it's actually something else. The kindest acts of the wicked are cruel is the back half of verse 10. So yeah, there's a call for discernment, I suppose, there, the back half of verse 10. How we respond to people. Not that you should be cynical of all people, not a good way to live your life, but assessing the character difference really between the righteous and the who I would say even cares for the needs of his animal, and the kindest acts of the wicked are cruel to start out with. Other texts in here or pairings that have grabbed your attention?
One thing I know is, and I don't know that there's any significance to it, but it's interesting, as you go down through it, you'll read one where good is then compared to bad.
Right.
And then the very next one is bad compared to good.
Yeah.
It keeps bouncing around.
It flips the order, yeah. So Bob's noticing the contrast. Sometimes it's righteous in the first line, wicked in the second line, or wise and foolish or whatever. And then it flips, and you'll have the undesirable character in the first line and the desirable in the second line. And that rhythm, the breaking of the rhythm kind of catches our attention. It's also worth observing that not all of these are contrasts. Look at verse 14, for example. From the fruit of his lips, a man is filled with good things, as surely as the work of his hands rewards him. So that's not a contrast, that's more of a comparison, or an amplification there. This is what Jesus says, right? Your behavior comes from your heart, Mark 7. Your words come from your heart, Luke 6. And so we're saying here, and this implies good or bad. Verse 14 doesn't single out the righteous, the wicked. It's implying whether you're righteous or wicked, your lips will get results and your words will get results, and they will be appropriate to what your lips or your actions, your lips or your works were in the first place. Another interesting one is the very first one in Proverbs chapter 12. We've got a comparison and a contrast tucked in these two lines. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge. To love the one is to love the other. To love knowledge is to love discipline, vice versa. But he who hates correction is stupid. Interesting, you don't have whoever loves discipline and loves knowledge is smart. That's implied because the opposite of hating correction is stupid. This is not a mean assessment thing. If I were to call a person stupid, that'd be not good. But to assess someone as being stupid, academically speaking, is not mean, although it causes a chuckle when you read the scripture out loud that way, of course. But so we got a comparison there with a contrast that says more than the two lines that say on their own. Also, a possible comparison or redundancy in the last verse of our chapter, maybe verse 28. My translation has, in the way of righteousness there is life, along that path is immortality. But the second phrase could also be something like, but the way of abomination leads to death, which is a totally different meaning than the line I have there, although you still want to go after the way of righteousness. That's the way of life. Yes, Sandy?
How about the word discipline, the first one you just brought up, has two different meanings, one being corrected and one being structured in how you go about your life.
Yeah. Probably discipline. So Sandy is saying discipline can have both a positive and a negative sense, just in the English, right? Discipline can be, I'm a disciplined person, therefore I'm not only structured, but I'm boundaried and I stay within a wise space. Or discipline could be, and I'm sure this has never happened, but you might discipline a grandchild for something that they say or do that's wrong. And so that could be in more of a corrective sense. This is one of those things where Proverbs has families of words that mean approximately the same thing, and even they can have different sense depending on the context. One of the main themes in Proverbs is that the fool is despising correction. I don't want to hear it. Right? So the Lord disciplines those he loves, and the wise respond to it. I want to receive his correction. And the fool says no. So I would get the sense in 12:1 we have more along the lines of correction, but discipline can also be teaching without the flavor of correction. So what exactly is intended there, I can't say for sure, but we get an idea by the other words it hangs out with, including knowledge here, the whole cluster of things together. If I'm going to embrace the Lord's correction, I'm going to embrace his teaching. I'm going to embrace positively and negatively the forms of correction. Yes, Liz?
My version says to learn, you must love discipline. So any kind of discipline that's instructing you, teaching you, whether it's showing you what you've done wrong or just training you up ahead of time.
Yeah. To learn, you must love discipline. I'm thinking about the experience of being on track or cross-country teams. And there's discipline you do just to run the workout, to participate in what the coach has assigned for you to do today. There's a discipline in that. He's not mad, not necessarily, but you're running what is you're supposed to run, and you're learning discipline through that. You're lifting weights, you're running miles, you're doing what you're doing. And then there's also discipline that would happen sometimes if somebody was out of line and would be disciplined for not doing what the coach asked. And both of those were aspects of making better individual runners, a better team together. So, to learn, there has to be an embrace of discipline, but the learning comes academically, and it also comes through correction, both ways. Yeah.
I think the discipline starts to get a bad name when you start adhering to group discipline.
Yeah, discipline gets a bad name when you get in trouble for something everybody else did, right? I always hated that, or when it's done in the wrong way, So that's where discipline, good or...
Yeah, I mean, when it's like a lot of stuff there's like shades of gray areas, whatever, it's not...
Right.
I don't particularly I like it black and white.
Right, you like it black and white.
It makes my life so much easier.
Yeah, and life is not always black and white, is it? That makes it complicated. It does make it complicated, for sure. I want to make a comment here at this point. I guess some of these are worded differently, depending on your translation. We saw a couple of examples last week. And just the reason that is that some words, their meaning is just uncertain. We have this in English today. I'll be reading a book, I'll come across a word I don't know, either because it's an old word or because the author has a wider vocabulary than I do. And from a whole paragraph or a whole page or a whole chapter, you can get a good sense of what that word likely means. But with these little two-liners, you have so little context to go on. And so in Hebrew, as with other languages, a letter or two can mean a big difference in this word over here that means this, or this word over here that means this. And so it's hard to determine. The other thing that's true in most of these is the conjunctions. You guys remember conjunction, junction, what's your function? The conjunction. There are conjunctions both in the Old Testament and the New that can be either and or but, depending on the context. So if you have in your opening line of a proverb these two words, and you have some opposites in the next line, you say, well, this is a but. Or if they're synonyms, you say, well, this is an and. But if you don't know what one of those words is, you really don't know, first of all, how to translate that word, and are we making a comparison or a contrast? So it becomes very difficult in the context of just a little two-liner to figure out some of these uncertain words that in other passages of Scripture where there's longer prose, longer narrative, you can figure out a little bit better what this word is or is not. So your thorough study Bibles are going to have footnotes on lots of these that could be worded as this, and they'll have different options for the phrases on some of these proverbs. But that's why there's the variance, maybe more so in Proverbs than other places, because one little word, one little letter even, can change the meaning of the phrase and change our idea whether it's a comparison or a contrast. And then sometimes we assume, well, we've had 15 contrasts in a row, this must be a contrast, but then it's not, it's a comparison. So that's why we have some of this uncertainty between different translations. Themes. What are themes? If you look through Proverbs 12, what are themes that rise to the surface as you read these? Themes that come up. And if you don't have answers, I've got a few to look into, but I wanted to see what you thought first. Yeah. Learning. Yes, learning coming up. Learning to be wise, learning to be disciplined. There's this idea of stewardship is throughout Proverbs. I think about chapter 4, where we're taking attention to our heart and what's going into our heart, and then also what's coming out of our heart. And so this sense of stewarding what you're being taught and what you're learning is a theme really throughout Proverbs. Are there themes that rise to the top here for you in this chapter? Concepts or terms or ideas? Hard work. Yeah, that's interesting. We've kind of taken a break from laziness in Proverbs. We had a bunch of it early on. You remember the invitation maybe from chapter 6. Go and look at the ant. The ant, at least to our observation, doesn't have a commander or a ruler, but the ant goes about and does its job and works together with the whole community for the good. Consider the industriousness of the ant. That's my paraphrase of chapter 6 there. And we've had some other words about laziness or hard work. Proverbs 10:4 is an example. Proverbs 10:4. Anybody want to read that this morning? I made you turn to page. Proverbs 10:4. Norm has it.
Lazy hands make for poverty, but diligent hands bring wealth.
There you go. Lazy hands make for poverty, diligent hands bring wealth. Again, this does not mean that all who are poor are lazy, but it does mean that laziness in general will lead to problems for you, and diligence in general will lead to having what you need. And so then we come here, Liz mentioned this theme, it's here twice in Proverbs 12. Once is in verse 24. Anybody want to read verse 24 again? We're in chapter 12.
Okay.
All right, Steve in the front row.
Work hard and become a leader. Be lazy and become a slave.
That's interesting. Work hard, become a leader, be lazy, and become a slave. Now, of course, not all people who are lazy become slaves, and not all slaves became slaves because they're lazy. Of course not. But the contrast here is, if you want to make your way up in the world, diligence is the way to do it. And if you want to work your way to the bottom, laziness is the way to do it. And then verse 27, I'm very interested in various translations of verse 27. Who'd like to read verse 27 for us? Deborah has it.
The lazy man does not roast his game, but the diligent man prizes his possessions.
There we go. Anybody else have anything that's markedly different in verse 27?
Diligent obtains precious wealth.
Mm-hmm. What about the first line there? Anybody have anything else other than roast? I'm just curious. This is a research. Yes, Charlotte.
Lazy people don't even cook the game they catch.
There you go.
But the diligent make use of everything.
Okay, don't even cook. We really don't, I say we, the scholars who are smart enough to do this stuff, don't really know what the verb translated as roast or cook means. We're guessing, because it has to fit. But we get the idea it's still a call to diligence over against laziness, and you get the idea that the diligent way is going to work out better. But that's one of those situations where we just really don't know exactly what the word means.
So that means eating the pizza cold out of the refrigerator or something?
Eating the pizza cold out of the fridge is probably not what the author of Proverbs has in mind at this point. They had no pizza, imagine that. They had no refrigerators. They didn't even have the Pittsburgh Pirates, Todd. Isn't that terrible? So it was a rough world in those days. But this is what happens in Proverbs. We don't know, for example, the meaning of that first line. Roast, maybe roast. We're hoping it's roast. We don't know. But if you stack up all the teachings in Proverbs on diligence and laziness, the takeaway is clear enough. So that's one of the things that happens here. Yes, Liz?
Well, I have more verses.
Yes, yes.
Verse 11, a hard worker has plenty of food, but a person who chases fantasies has no sense.
There you go. Verse 11 is another lazy and hardworking thing. He who works his land will have abundant food. He who chases fantasies lacks judgment. That's the word heart again there, lacks heart. We've seen that a whole bunch of times, the red line in the middle here, where it's often translated lacks judgment or lacks discernment, which is fine, but I think it's fun that it's actually the word heart, lacks heart, because we've had such attentiveness, we mentioned, to storing up the teaching of wisdom in our hearts and to guarding our hearts against the voices of the gang or the strange woman, and to considering what's coming out of our hearts and our mouths and where our feet are carrying our hearts. We've had all this emphasis on tending to the heart, offense and defense. And so to see all these instances throughout Proverbs where this person who acts in an unfavorable way or gets an unfavorable result is actually that way because they're lacking in heart. It implies they have not done what they need to do to store up the wisdom, the insight in their heart.
Well, I'm just, the phrase chases fantasies really got me too. Like, just in our world today, like, we have more opportunity than ever to chase any fantasy you want, you know?
Yeah.
Not just put in the diligent work, do what we're supposed to do.
Yeah, so chasing fantasies, the last half of verse 11 there, Liz is saying we have more opportunities than ever to chase fantasies. And you can create entire virtual fantasies for yourself that no one else knows about. And chasing of fantasies, that's a little preview of Ecclesiastes there for us, which we will get to at some point in the next 10 to 15 years. But Ecclesiastes, it talks about the chasing after the wind. So what am I going after is a good life question. What am I going after right now? And not just broadly, but particularly in this situation that comes up. What am I really aiming for? One of my verses this morning in my regular Bible reading is from Galatians 1:10. Am I trying to please people or trying to please God? And so there's lots of different angles you and I can have for life at large or for a particular incident. What am I going after here? And it's easy to chase after a fantasy. We all laugh at the dog chasing its tail, but sometimes we do that. Yes, Bill.
Well, when you consider back when this was, and the fact that this is a very agrarian economy, very agrarian thing, one who grew their crops, worked the garden, did those types of things, they feed themselves. They had the ability to feed themselves. We could do that today. A lot of people could. But instead, they're not looking to try to feed themselves. They're looking for something else out there.
Yeah, so Bill is saying in that context, working the land is life or death, right? I mean, the people who are working the land having food. So to not participate in that, to not participate in the things that are necessary for life and to go out chasing the wind here is a foolish thing. You're not going to have anything to live on, to sustain you down the line.
Even King Ahab wanted space for his garden.
Yeah.
And he probably didn't have to have it, but he wanted.
Sure.
Apparently it was part of the society to the point that even the king had a garden.
Yeah, even the king had a garden and probably somebody else to work it for him.
Well,
Yeah. So, and this would not be I would not take this all the time and say people with gardens are wiser than people without gardens. But I would say that what this is saying is that the people who are working toward the things that are important and necessary are going to be in good shape, and the people who are going off after meaningless things are going to be in bad shape. So don't feel guilty if you don't have a garden. That's not the point of the proverb here. But it is a sobering reminder. There are things worth working for and things not worth working for. What are we chasing after? Charlotte, you had a point or a question?
I was just saying another theme has to do with words.
Words. Oh, it's all over the place. Yeah.
Verse 6, the words of the wicked are like a murderous ambush, but the words of the godly save lives.
Yes, yes.
18 and 19, some people make cutting remarks, but the words of the wise bring healing.
Yes, yes.
Truthful words stand the test of time, but lies are soon exposed.
Yes, yes. And the language of speech is all over the place in Proverbs 12. And one of these lines on here, the green ones in my thinking, all have to do with speech, directly and indirectly. Let's deal with verse 6 first, which you mentioned there. The words of the wicked lie in wait for blood, but the speech of the upright rescues them. That is kind of in parallel to verse 13. An evil man is trapped by his sinful talk, but a righteous man escapes trouble. This idea of being trapped, being killed, being snared, or being rescued, being set free. You may remember from chapter 1 of Proverbs, the gang has this plan. Come with us. We're going to attack this guy and kill him and steal his stuff and have our own counterfeit wealth and community. It'll be a great time. And the Proverbs say they actually lie in wait only for themselves. Their plot to get blood is going to get blood, but it's going to be their own blood. They're going to destroy themselves in this journey. And so that theme is kind of in the background here, verses 6 and 13. Notice it's the words here again. The emphasis in your speech, the words of the wicked lie in wait for blood. Whose blood? We would think, well, they're saying mean things to bring somebody else down, and maybe they are. But we know from chapter 1 that inevitably that kind of course is going to be their own blood. They're going to destroy themselves. The wicked are going to destroy themselves with their own words. That's the meaning of the first half of the verse. But the speech of the upright rescues them. The righteous words, the wise words, end up providing deliverance, implied for themselves and maybe also for others in the way they speak. And then evil man, verse 13, is trapped by his sinful talk. His own sinful speech traps him. You ever done that, by the way? You ever said something you shouldn't have said, and now you're stuck because of what you said? Oh, I know we've only heard about that far away, and we've not actually had that, but your own wicked words are a trap, but the righteous man escapes trouble, implied by not engaging in the sinful talk. So your words, your speech, can be trapping, destroying to yourself and others, or they can be freeing to yourself and others. And that's lifted up there in verses 6 and 13. Many, many other emphases on speaking here, though. Let's do another pair that I think has to do with speaking. Verses 16 and 23 also have to do with this subject of speaking. Verse 16, a fool shows his annoyance at once, but a prudent man overlooks an insult. You ever done either of those things before? Sometimes we lose it and we speak right away, and it would have been a whole lot better to can it and hold on to it. So the fool instantly plays his cards and shows how irritated, angry he is. The prudent man overlooks an insult. We're not going to do that. And then verse 23, the prudent man keeps his knowledge to himself, but the heart of the fool blurts out folly. So there is wisdom sometimes in being silent. There's wisdom in not saying. Very, very often, in fact, ordinarily, if I didn't speak now, I will have an opportunity to speak later. But if I do speak now, it's really hard to reel that back in. And so it's like James 1. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, because human anger doesn't produce the righteousness of God. And we have the same idea here. The fool speaks quickly and angrily. The prudent man holds it back and doesn't play all of his cards, while the heart of the fool blurts out and just keeps blurting out. Questions or comments about that situation? Yes, Norm.
I can't help but go back to what you said about Raymond.
Yeah.
Invariably, Raymond would be able to speak quickly to the wife.
Deborah, right?
Deborah, but hold his mouth against his mother,
There
who
you
was
go.
making the insult
That's right. That's right. And you know, you're talking about Everybody Loves Raymond, but this is true of all sitcoms. One thing that's funny about sitcoms is the person who blurts out without thinking. I think about Carter on Hogan's Heroes. He's the one who blurts out the unwise thing without thinking about it. And Hogan has this reputation that holds it back and doesn't just say whatever. And you have that contrast is funny to us because we've been on both sides. Gomer Pyle, that's right. That's right.
He blurted out anything.
Gomer says anything right. The Barney-Andy contrast is a good one along these lines. The discretion of not speaking right now versus the folly of just blurting it out. And there's not, you know, there's wisdom in having a filter, you know, and so that's something that is developed. And this is not the first time we've been called to watch our mouths in Proverbs. Other comments? What'd you say?
Open mouth, insert.
Open mouth, insert foot. That's right. That's right. And we've all done that.
I mean, a lot of these proverbs, if you look at them in chapter 12, revolve around words or the results of words that are being spoken.
Yeah.
And what transpires because of that.
Yeah.
I mean, insults, it all has to do with speaking to other people and what you say.
Yeah.
I mean, who of us cannot say that we messed up royally?
Oh, sure. Yeah, there's such emphasis on speech in Proverbs that our words have such potential impact. This is James 3. The same mouth can do this or can do this over here. Positive things or negative things. Great impact for the mouth. And to think about that. But then again, if you go back to Proverbs 4 and other places in Scripture, it's not just a matter of trying hard not to say stupid things. It's a matter of praying like crazy and inviting the Lord to search our hearts and help me to learn. So why did I blurt it out, Lord? It's not help me to not say that again. It may be part of that, but it's also show me why that came out and help me to deal with that because it came out because it was in there. And that's part of the invitation here too. It's not trying harder to say good words and not say bad words. It's examining my heart. Why is that coming out? And inviting the Lord to shape me. Because if the heart is holy, the speech will be holy. Or to the extent the heart is holy, the speech will be holy. And vice versa. Charlotte, you highlighted two others in that speech theme, which is like half the chapter. But you read verses 18 and 19. Would you read verses 18 and 19 again? Because I liked your translation.
Some people make cutting remarks, but the words of the wise bring healing. Truthful words stand the test of time, but lies are soon exposed.
That's right. Okay, thank you. So what your translation has in verse 18 is cutting remarks, which is our common expression today. Someone in a cutting remark. The Hebrew word is sword, pierced like a sword, which is contrast with the next line, which has to do with bringing healing. So I think about the contrast in Isaiah. They'll beat their swords into plowshares. Their tools of death are going to become tools of life. And now we have the reckless words are the sword, but the wise speech is the healing. And what an opportunity we have, because everybody has experienced cutting words. Everybody's experienced, either deliberately or accidentally, we've all experienced cutting words. And to be the people who speak words of healing to people who are hurting because they've experienced cutting words is a tremendous opportunity. You think about Jesus calling us to be the salt and the light and that sort of thing. We're the aroma of Christ, Paul says. But to speak healing words, yes.
When I was a therapist, one of the assignments sometimes I would give when couples were struggling to be kind to each other, to start an appreciation journal, which they kept in the bathroom.
Yeah.
And each day, the husband would be assigned to write down one thing he appreciated about his wife that day, and she was to write something she appreciated
Yeah.
about her husband that day.
Yeah.
And you became rather eager to look and see what was in it.
Yeah, something good today. So Charlotte's talking about when she was a therapist, assigning a couple that's dealing with conflict. Yeah, keep a journal there, and then they would take turns writing in appreciative comments about the other person. That would help be a part of the healing thing. You know, sometimes we get so fixated in a person in life. It's in your household, it's at your workplace, it's at your school, it's at church, whatever. And there's someone who's doing something that is just flabbergasting, and it just drives you nuts. And you forget everything else about that person. And that doesn't mean that what they're doing is no big deal. It doesn't mean it's not wrong. It doesn't mean, but there's a context there. And sometimes in the heat of conflict, I forget the 100 wonderful things about that person, and I'm fixated on the hard thing that's difficult right now. So to practice kind words, to practice healing words, thanksgiving words, right? I'm appreciative of this about you. And on a broader level with God, we see that all over the place in Scripture. The practice of thanksgiving would save us from the ingratitude, the bitterness, the cutting words, these sort of things. Yeah. So are my words healing words? Are my words wounding words? I think, I couldn't tell you what it says, and Norm just left, but the Rotary have their 4 tests of everything we think, say, or do. And basically one of the lines is it going to be beneficial to all concerned? Is it kind? Is it true? Is it fair? Those kind of things. And to consider my words. Are my words cutting words? Are my words healing words right now? And that sort of thing.
I think it's service above self.
Service above self is in there too, yeah. So anyway, you should go to the Presbyterian Church, wander down the hallway, and look at the blue banner, and it'll tell you everything the Rotarians say about, you can probably find it on the internet too, I guess, about speaking. But are my words helpful here? When we have the luxury, which is not always the case, when we have the luxury of knowing a conversation is coming. I know this conversation with so-and-so or with this group is going to happen about this topic. Then we can pray about this and pray that our words would be healing and not hurtful. The trick is in the moment when the thing comes up and now we're going to respond on the fly. And at that point, then you have to have the work in your heart already ongoing, inviting the Lord to scrutinize and shape so that we're better prepared more often to respond better in the moment. I thought of this myself, different situations in life where I found myself losing my patience or making a cutting remark or whatever. And I find my prayers sometimes like, okay, Lord, help me perform better next time. Help me to perform better. And that's not it. There's not much value in that. It's, Lord, show me what is going on so that I can be ready to respond with words that are helpful and not hurting in whatever context it might be. Other things that rise to the surface here for you in Proverbs chapter 12. Things that resonate, things that ring true, things that convict. Yes, Liz.
Verse 19 that Cheryl just read too, talking about the truthful words standing the test of time.
Yeah.
That was another thing that I noticed, not just in this chapter, but in Proverbs, a theme of permanence versus temporary. Like so, certain words last forever, whereas the lies are soon expired.
Yeah, truthful words stand the test of time, verse 19, but the lying tongue lasts only for a moment.
Verse 3 also talks about that. The wickedness is not going to bring stability, but the godly have deep roots.
Yeah, wickedness won't bring stability. Godly have deep roots. Okay, so a couple things there. The famous sayings that we quote repeatedly are generally the wise sayings we regard as true. Somebody said that ages ago, and it's still true, so we quote that again. The lies, we don't tend to quote those again and again and again. But Liz goes back to an interesting verse here, verse 3. A man cannot be established through wickedness, but the righteous cannot be uprooted. Any person can't be established through wickedness, meaning the way of wickedness, the crooked way, that kind of path. But the righteous can't be uprooted. So you get the idea the righteous already have roots, and those roots are so deep and so growing they can't be uprooted. Meanwhile, the man who tries to establish himself through wickedness can't even take root. It's like trying to plant grass seed in a yard won't work. You're just not even getting going. Versus the righteous, and Liz mentioned a few weeks ago, we watched this documentary about the Wild West, but it had these prairie fires. And the prairie fires will blow through Nebraska or someplace. You think it's utter devastation. And within a matter of days, you get all this green coming up again because the root system is extensive for this prairie grass. It's just amazing. And so the righteous are deeply rooted to the point where they can't be uprooted. And the man trying to get roots through wickedness can't even sink roots down. It's not even going to happen. So that's an interesting contrast there. You went to verse 3. I'd like to deal with verse 2 and verse 22 because we have a theme drift back in here that has been touched on before, and that is the theme of the Lord's response. how does the Lord respond to our ways of being and our actions? So verse 2 of Proverbs 12, a good man obtains favor from the Lord, but the Lord condemns a crafty man. Again, it's not an exact parallel, because the good man is obtaining favor from the Lord as passively, but the Lord condemns actively the crafty man. Crafty here used in its negative sense. You can be shrewd in a positive sense in Proverbs as well, but here you have goodness versus craftiness contrasted, and the good man receives favor from the Lord, and the crafty man is condemned by the Lord. And then verse 22, the Lord detests lying lips, back to the mouth theme, the speech theme. The Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in men who are truthful. And so those two verses there both talk about the Lord's response to either our goodness or our craftiness, to our lying or to our truthfulness, giving a picture of the kinds of things the Lord responds to. We already saw earlier, chapter 3, he mocks proud mockers, but gives grace to the humble. So the Lord responds in certain ways, and not so much, I guess, that the Lord responds, how shall I respond to this? But the Lord is who he is and operates how he does, and I kind of put myself at odds with him, with my craftiness, my lying, my arrogance, and I put myself in his way, and I put myself in a good direction in favor of the Lord by speaking truthfulness and by humility and by doing what is good. Questions or comments about that? Yes, Bill.
We see so much in our society today that people will say they're telling the truth, but they're using their craftiness. They're not telling the whole truth. They're telling portions that basically align with what they desire to have people think.
Okay.
And they're not really telling the whole truth a lot of the time.
Okay.
They're not given the whole truth. They're given their portion that will persuade people to agree with them with whatever they're doing.
Sure.
I think that was the same even back this.
Yeah, there's an age-old tactic, as long as there have been humans, to selectively pick truths to the point where what I put together now isn't even true at all. What'd you say? Cut it back in the Garden of Eden, right? You know, the way the serpent does his business with Eve is grabbing certain aspects and twisting a little bit. So being completely truthful. And I can think about follow-up conversations I've had with people. Well, I said this and this, but I should also have said this, because this is helpful context to that conversation we're having as well. And to lay the whole thing out there. And to think about why we hold back from truthfulness. Why do we hold back? And there's a number of reasons for that, depending on the situation. But very often what we're trying to avoid by withholding truth can't ultimately be avoided anyway. The truth is going to come out. Jesus says as much. It'll be shouted from the rooftops. So why do we try to massage the truth? There's a time for wisdom with that. There's a time you're trying to deal delicately or wisely or gently with somebody. So there's a time for being wisely and righteously selective in the truth and how I'm conveying it. But there's also, and what you're getting to is the disingenuous kind, where I'm trying to sell you a bill of goods or get out of trouble or whatever. So.
Well, the truth hurts sometimes.
The truth hurts sometimes, right? Right. I can see that the truth, if it comes out, is going to lead to a bad consequence for me. So let me try this lie and see how that works. And usually it comes back around. It's just a longer path to get to that destination. But yeah.
Well, I was just, I was fixing to say that, here it's laid out for you, right? Here's what to do, here's what not to do. And, this part sounds pretty good. I'll give this a whirl and come back to it. But everybody's path is different. Yeah. It doesn't matter, you see what I'm saying? Getting at it. Even though the destination is the same,
yeah,
everybody's path to it is different.
Sure, and I think sometimes you learn how to take wiser paths from having to take the not so wise path.
And sometimes you're a bonehead and you insist on doing it your way.
Right.
Being a bonehead doing it your
So since you mentioned being a bonehead doing it your own way, that is in here, verse 15. The way of a fool seems right to him, but a wise man listens to advice. You remember the admonition earlier from chapter 3, do not be wise in your own eyes, but fear the Lord and shun evil. And we have the fool who like, hey, I've got this great idea. This is how I'm going to go about this. It's wonderful. I don't need to hear from you. I've got my plan figured out. I don't want to hear your correction, your other ideas, your technicalities, your nuance. I know what I want. I'm going to go after it. But the wise man listens to advice before he goes on. I told you, I read a lot of American history, and a common denominator between President Washington and President Lincoln was a willingness to listen to advice, even when they were inclined to do something differently. And that's true just of wise leadership in general, then and now, men and women, the ability to listen well, even when I don't really want to, will lead to a wiser course of action than, nope, I got this figured out, here I go. And how many times have you and I said, no, I got this figured out, and grabbed the bull by the horns, and oh my goodness.
The master, really, taking in from different parties and,
Yeah.
still considering politics, but still, the whole stew pot was, his cabinet.
Yeah. Lincoln was the master of this, I would say, of listening well to dissenting voices, and also Lincoln was also the master of the not, overlooking the insults and not saying something right now, because he was wise enough to know, Lincoln was in his cabinet, I need this person. The country benefits from this person. They're a pain in the you-know-what, but I'm going to put up with all that because this is in the best interest of everything else. And so President Lincoln was very good at not taking that personal offense or not making a thing of the personal offense for the sake of what he believed was better for the country and all this. So those two things go together, not being wise in my own eyes, listening well to advice, and then also not being quick to take offense and lash out, but holding back on that for the benefit of everybody concerned. Those two things are related, and I think his life story is a demonstration of that. President Lincoln was not perfect, that's not my point, but there was some things to learn about him for sure, yeah.
Well, the original Congress that came together, I watched several of the specials during the 4th of July, and there were a lot of people, the northern states didn't want slavery at all, but the southern states did because their grain economy were heavy grain economy. And they basically came to a compromise so that they could get all 13 colonies together, because otherwise it would have split and there wouldn't have been the strength that they needed with separate entities that they needed with all 13 colonies together. So they came to an agreement upon that to give more power to the South than what they would have had otherwise.
Yeah.
And so, it wasn't necessarily the best resolution from what we see now today, but it was a way to get them together at that time so that they could form there.
Yeah, it was. And so Bill is talking about the process of trying to make compromises, issues north and south, especially slavery, and when they're establishing the Constitution, this sort of thing. And they really blew it, in my opinion. They kicked the can down the road that if they hadn't kicked it, we wouldn't have had the Civil War, and obviously slavery was horrible. Some influential people, and Washington's among them, had the opportunity to wrestle with their own difficulties on that and come out with a stronger response than they did. But in the case of both people like Washington and Jefferson, their slavery was masking their indebtedness and enabled them to keep what they were doing. And an inability, because both of them had inclinations. You can read in their writings, both those guys, and they're not the only ones, starting to get the idea that the slavery thing wasn't a good idea, but unable to actually bring themselves to set them free until, of course, they're dead, at which point it doesn't cost them, right? So there were some moments where they could have been, there's a place for wise compromise. I don't think that was one of them. There was an opportunity there to really deal with an issue. And of course, easy for me to say with hindsight and everything like that, but there is a time to withhold, there's a time to not advocate for something out of wisdom, and there's a time where something needs to be said or done, and discerning that is a difficult thing. So one of the things about this whole way of wisdom is it's a shaping thing. I want to continually be shaped so I respond better and know in these situations how best to respond and have the wisdom for that. We're in overtime now. That's pretty well Proverbs 12. We're going to do Proverbs 13 next week, the same as we did today. I invite you to read it in advance, if you would. Things that come to the top for you, dominating themes, verses that are puzzling or especially striking to you, keep an eye on that. We'll do Proverbs 13 next week and do the same